The greatest adventure is what lies ahead. Today and tomorrow are yet to be said. The chances, the changes are all yours to make. The mold of your life is in your hands to break.
Hey everyone, Dave here. You know my brother Nick.
Sup?
This is our father Greg. We have each seen The Hobbit, or at least some of it. We were each at different screenings, but
Midnight showing! What up?
Half of the midnight showing.
A third of it. I left an hour in. I had a 7 a.m. work shift.
So yeah, we are all here to discuss Tolkien Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Silmarillion.
Yes.
Quite an appropriate title, I feel.
Yes.
So, I enjoyed it. It was not perfect, it could have been a lot shorter, but I think I went in with just the right expectations, as I am prone to do with movies.
Which is no expectations.
Well, I went in like I knew, okay, scenes will be good. I know people are disappointed, so I'm keeping those disappointments in mind, but I'm also allowing myself to enjoy it. And
Scenes will be good. I must not have gotten that far.
I enjoyed it. My expectations were low, and it exceeded my expectations.
Can we all admit there is no reason to make it 3 movies? Like, they are stretching to make it 3 movies.
everyone.
Absolutely.
It was slow and long. Can we acknowledge that? Like, on some level. Maybe not too slow, maybe not too long, but it was slow and long and didn't need to be.
It didn't feel long to me. And
it was slow.
It didn't feel that slow to me.
I will say, okay, you're right, it could have been a lot shorter. It felt a little slow at the very beginning. It stopped feeling slow. Like,
yes.
I was like, okay.
So trilogy, one point against, is that it's a trilogy. Just scorecard here.
Scorecard, we're doing this.
I will grant you though, this Over the Misty Mountains song, amazing. That was
Yes, they
awesome.
had
I'm gonna grant that right here, Misty Mountains song.
They got most of the songs from the book in there. Most songs. They had Misty Mountains. They had Chip the Glasses.
Chip the Glasses.
And they had a version of the goblins.
Right.
Of the down to Goblin Town.
So
they did not have.
Which was good. They didn't do the whole of that because that
Right.
would have been tedious.
for my own edification, where does the movie end?
The movie ends with the Eagles take them away.
Look at that.
Yes.
How are they gonna make this 3 movies?
goes
Is
pretty
the
far.
Battle of 5 Armies just its own movie?
Maybe.
Probably.
Maybe so. We don't see Bjorn.
We don't.
That makes
the
sense.
Eagles
have dropped.
I would be shocked if we saw Bjorn in the first installment.
The very last. By the way, spoilers.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yes,
for that.
excuse us.
Because I knew they were going to be adding stuff in from elsewhere in the Tolkien canon.
Yep.
And I was prepared to make the joke about, and they decided to just throw back in the scene of the Sackville Baggins is taking the spoons. But they actually referenced that
They
scene
actually
in the
talk about the spoons.
movie,
Yeah.
so
Which actually brings me to one of my first criticisms. As I've only seen the first hour, for those of you who've seen the film, I left when they realized some of the ponies had been eaten by the trolls, and you're like, oh, the trolls are about to show up. God knows if they actually are about to show up, because the pacing in this film was terrible. So maybe they didn't, but that's when I left and got sleep. Point being, the whole frame story of Frodo, I'm writing you a story right on the day of my birthday. What was that? That was like 20 minutes of my life I'm never going to get back.
I will agree with you there. That existed only to help ease people in who only know the movies.
But it was like like that annoying little cousin your parents make you take to a party who's like, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here.
I totally disagree. I thought it was great. I thought it had good. You cannot move too quickly to the traveling, because you have to get some sense of the Shire, and this was kind of how it introduced the characters, and it gave a throwback to Fellowship.
Except it didn't introduce. The reason it introduced the Shire is to introduce what the status quo is before the adventure, and it doesn't. It introduces the status quo after the adventure, which is Bilbo has gold, is this, kind of guy who's shut away from people and is kind of going weird in his old age.
Right,
it
that's
didn't
fair enough.
actually establish normality. It just reiterated the normality at the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring, which isn't actually useful to the story.
Here's some.
Fair enough.
Now, like, one of the many, many complaints people have about the Star Wars prequels is that they don't feel like Star Wars. I think the biggest complaint about the Hobbit trilogy is going to be that it feels too much like Lord of the Rings.
See, very close to my biggest criticism, but slightly different in that my biggest criticism is it did not feel like Lord of the Rings, which I mean, on the one hand, it shouldn't. It's The Hobbit. But it felt like it was trying to be Lord of the Rings.
Right.
It felt like it was trying to be Lord of the Rings, but was shot in the wrong color temperature. Because the whole first,
or the wrong frame rate.
I didn't see it in the wrong frame.
It should have been black and white with Humphrey Bogart and Sidney Greenstreet.
Oh, that would have been amazing. I would see that movie.
Yes.
But like the whole
like the
backstory,
page.
Yes.
absolutely, the whole backstory of the Thorin and the whole mountains thing, I didn't care. It's like I have not been introduced to these characters yet. I don't care. And this is not an epic enough backstory to justify the 20 minutes you're spending on it.
Well,
I want to hear this story from the dwarves who care.
That's
I don't want to hear this from the impartial narrator.
No, I will agree with you there, and that's like my biggest that was probably my biggest issue in the movie, but it was not actually 20 minutes.
Sorry, it was like 15.
It was done in like the first 2.5 minutes.
Sorry, no, it's 30 minutes in is when they're somewhere in the house when the dwarves are there. I think 30 minutes in is when they sing Over the Misty Mountains. I was checking the clock. So it's about 15 minutes of backstory.
But my point is, I agree with you there that they were trying to do the same thing they did in Fellowship, where they open with, the big Middle-earth history.
Right.
And I don't think that was the right choice for this, because this is the story, this story should begin in a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit.
Exactly.
This story, this should have small beginnings, and the small hobbit should be introduced to the wider world and the wider history around him.
That's a good point. Absolutely.
I agree with that. I also think, we all knew they were going to do frame story. I don't think setting it on the same day that Fellowship begins is the right choice.
Dan, if he can write The Hobbit in a day, I don't know what I'm doing with my life and my screenplays.
No, he was writing the revised edition of The Hobbit now. He was writing the one where he fixes riddles in the dark now.
Yes.
But we knew they were going to do the frame story with Ian Holm. My biggest problem with having it be the same day is that Ian Holm seems noticeably older.
Yes.
He was very slow.
I wasn't sure it was the same actor. I was like, the makeup looks different.
Oh, I actually thought he looked... I expected him to look older.
Well...
Than he did.
But he was a lot slower. His words were more
His face
slurry.
was different shape.
Compared to the energy he has in Fellowship, which then raises the question, would somebody kept alive that long by the ring really have that energy in Fellowship? But what's done is done.
Opening a whole new can of worms.
If they had to start with Ian Holm, basically, they should have started with the end of The Hobbit, where Gandalf and... I'm blanking on which dwarf it is who comes to visit.
Yes.
They
just read this.
I know, last night. I forget.
I don't remember. Was it? No, it wasn't Dwalin, was it? I think it was an Allen. It was either Balin or Dwalin.
Okay, right. We're gonna edit this out and find it.
Okay, go find it.
Balin. It was Balin.
Boom! I knew it was an Allen one.
It was Balin.
So when Balin and Gandalf continue.
So they could have had the frame story. They could have had Frodo in that scene. They could have had, Bilbo, it's Gandalf and Balin showing up, and they're reminiscing.
See,
except Frodo wasn't alive when they got back,
because he was only
it was 60 years earlier.
50.
No. But this wasn't. But that scene happens.
He's saying
that scene happens a lot later.
He's saying
you could date the scene later.
Retcon it. So.
I don't know. I don't remember if the book says how many years had passed before that scene happens.
See, Dave, I realize, I don't know if this is just the Tarantino and Night Shyamalan in me, but I might actually be okay with the frame story and be okay with them setting it on the day of the party if they didn't reveal it until the third movie. If the last moment of the frame story was putting up the...
Okay.
I might have been okay with that. I don't know why.
It was.
I might have been okay with that.
It was fairly obvious because of the conversation, the sign, and then Frodo going off with the book.
And it's some of the... the fact
they did keep hammering it in.
The stuff is the same from the... Especially if you've seen the extended version.
Yeah.
Where he's writing concerning hobbits. it's the same desk,
Yes.
the same book.
Yes,
like
that's
it.
right.
Also, you should really see a doctor about having that Shyamalan removed from you.
I know. Oh
Yes.
my goodness! I've been taking pills. They're not
Yes.
working.
By the way, even though I knew that Lee Pace from Pushing Daisies was playing the King of Mirkwood, I didn't recognize him at first when he showed up.
I didn't know. And
I didn't.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have recognized him.
No.
Sorry. Quick concession. The guy who plays Thorin is awesome.
Very
As
intense.
much as-
I expected him to be older.
Perhaps,
but he really
he's
has
also a
the
dwarf,
intensity.
so it's
he's
like
older in most of the portrayals.
Yeah.
here's the thing: is he wasn't old in like physical appearance, but he was old in spirit.
Yes,
he
that's
played old well, and
Yes.
for a dwarf, I bought it.
Yes.
So, as much as I'm the one who thinks this movie was kind of stupid,
Yeah.
the guy who played Thorin was awesome.
Right.
And
I didn't care for his backstory thing that
Yes.
suddenly happened when
Yeah.
I thought we were about to see trolls.
Yeah.
okay,
For
yeah.
5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
That was another thing I'm sure, like, when they introduced the orc he has a personal vendetta with,
Yes.
Yeah.
When-
you knew it was going to be the
when they introduced the Count Rugen orc, basically, my name is Thorin Oakenshield, you killed my father.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
Um,
Exactly.
has a deformity on one arm.
Yes. It's a perfect.
I actually thought that they were going to replace the Goblin King in the Misty Mountains with him. You didn't get this far, but
Oh,
they
they
didn't.
didn't?
They
No.
still have the
Oh my
Goblin King in the
god!
Misty
I
Mountains.
thought
Yes.
they were going
Who
to.
was a great character.
Really?
Yes. They played him smarter than I expected them to play any goblin.
But he was still
Interesting.
he was goofy enough.
He was goofy and slimy,
also-
but intelligent.
That's intriguing
Yes.
sounding.
He was
Yes,
I think it was Barry Humphries, the comedian, was doing his voice.
Oh my gosh, very nicely done. I thought.
And
Oh, so they're
And the CGI. of
wait, so they're
how they made
saving
him
that
was
head
good.
orc for the Battle of Five Armies then?
that's what I'm guessing it's gonna
Yes.
be, because they did have a showdown with that orc at the end of the movie in the 15 birds in
Oh,
the
okay.
trees, which they didn't have. They cut that song.
Yes,
the
that's
15
right.
birds and 5
Yes.
trees, and they cut the songs that the elves sing at Rivendell when they're showing
Yes,
the
they had
Hobbit thing.
some. They had some music,
Which is a
It's
shame,
good.
because I would have liked to hear Brett McKenzie sing that song.
Life's a happy song when there's someone by my side to sing along.
There was a lot more comic relief than in The Hobbit, or than in Lord of the Rings. I thought they could have gone even funnier with some of it.
Mhm.
They-
Which ones
they-
in particular?
They had
With the trolls or with everything?
with
Then I agree.
they could have at least paced. Like I liked Chip the Glasses Cracked the Place.
Right.
I thought that was
I liked how it started. I thought it started organically, but very quickly it felt like... Okay, this is my criticism of all the comedy in the first hour. It felt like they were breezing through it. The good morning conversation had the pacing of when I skim a book. It did not have the pacing of when I read a book.
so.
Like, I don't know whether it was the music, which was like a little too over everything, or whether it was the editing, but something about that, or whether it was the way they trimmed the dialogue in places.
So
Well,
your
it was
problem,
trimmed. Yes.
your problem is that everything except the comedy was slow.
Yes.
Yeah, the comedy felt like they kind of like,
Well-
it really felt like it was done by someone who didn't quite get comedy, but was kind of like, we'll shoot it like a movie and it'll turn out funny.
Well, and here's the thing. You have Martin Freeman as Bilbo. Martin Freeman, we've all wanted Martin Freeman to be Bilbo. Like,
Yes.
No, totally.
like we were
And he was fantastic.
Oh, no, Martin
Be-
Freeman was,
before-
I am in no way besmirching
Yeah.
Martin Freeman.
Yeah.
like long before, like back when they were tossing around the name like James McAvoy and all these names. We were
Right.
like, the obvious choice is Martin Freeman.
He played Arthur Dent, he can play Bilbo
He-
Baggins.
and he's like, he was the straight man in the original Office, which is probably the quintessential comedy of the generation. Like even if you're not a Ricky Gervais fan, the original Office just directly influenced so much of contemporary comedy.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
that for him to get the straight man from that, like the master of reactions, and as early as The Office, he was displaying a deft hand at both comedy and drama.
Well, and then Sherlock Holmes.
And then
Great
and
drama
now-
with an underlying hint of comic relief.
Exactly.
Yes.
He's such a fantastic actor. I don't think they used him poorly. I just think they could have used him even better than they did.
The first time we see Bilbo,
Yes.
he's like a little bit rude and we're not quite in his element, and it's shot weird. I don't mean to be the film student who's like, they shot this poorly, but
Which
they
scene?
shot the scene with Gandalf and Bilbo. The first time you see
The
Martin
Good Morning.
Freeman,
The Good
where
Morning scene.
it transitions from 60 years later to
Right.
60 years earlier, and suddenly younger.
I like that shot.
It's like
Maybe it's just because I'm comparing it to the Rankin Bass version, where it's just like Gandalf just shows up, Bilbo, adventure, I'm Gandalf.
Yeah, but at least in that, Bilbo had some introduction. If he's standing in his, in his element, in front of his house.
His
the
introduction
camera
is he
moves up,
washes a plate and then he smokes up.
But he's like in his element. In this, it felt like the camera was looking down on him the whole time, and he was kind of like awkward from the moment it happened. He had no moment of being
I
in his
didn't get
element.
any of that.
No,
I thought that was a pretty nice scene.
Okay.
I don't know. I
To
was
say,
really disappointed
To
in that
say
scene.
the Rankin Bass version did anything better in that scene is pushing it. They don't show him any more in his element than Peter Jackson does, and Peter Jackson, granted, he may have been resting on this a little much, but he has the benefit of we already know who Bilbo is.
Right, but we don't know who Martin Freeman is. We know who old Bilbo is. We have no idea who young Bilbo is.
Well, but that tie is clear. I mean, this is probably why they have the Ian Holm thing.
Yeah.
No, but I'm saying it's
you're already invested in this character. Once you see Ian Holm,
I'm not.
and then you see
like I see young Bilbo, and I don't know who he is yet.
That could be your fault.
Yes.
It could be.
yes,
but
I think very few members of the audience are going to have that reaction.
I
It's,
don't know.
They made Bilbo a much more active character
At
than
that
he is
point.
in. Well,
Yes.
even all along, I thought he was a much more.
Oh, absolutely.
Than in the
Yeah.
book, he's
Yes.
because like
He chose to go on the adventure.
yeah, even from
right
the start,
there.
rather than doing the. But no time for that. But no time for that either. Off you
Yes,
go. They had
that's
him
right.
make
Which
the active decision.
I was upset about.
Yes.
It makes sense from a cinematic standpoint. Whether or not it's the decision I would have made as a filmmaker, it makes sense from a cinematic standpoint to have an active protagonist, especially if you're already resigned to stretching the movie out,
See,
to
That's
stretching the story
that's
out.
where I disagree.
They have,
Continue.
hear me out. In the book, he very gradually makes the arc from being passive to active.
Right.
For the first half of the book, the most active character is Gandalf.
Yes.
It would have just been Gandalf's movie.
Right.
And I think Ian McKellen even got top billing in the
Yes.
movie.
About Bilbo taking a more active role, I want to say it was very slight. He decides to go at the very beginning. He stalls the trolls an hour later almost, right? And then the scene in the with the trees where he runs down to try to help save Thorin. Those are really the only three places where he takes a more active role than he takes in the book.
I kind of missed like Gandalf being sneaky and like throwing the voices and everything.
Yeah, I thought that was a little off. I'm not sure it was a horrible
I kinda missed
decision.
that.
As someone who's never
I like-
seen the scene,
Mhm.
it reminds me of when Frodo was the one who figured out the riddle and fell to ship with the ring.
It was that kind of thing.
Yes.
It was
Yes.
all about.
And when Frodo chose not to go over the Karadoras.
Yes.
And
It all came down to making the protagonist more active.
More central. Yeah.
Okay.
I think it was a small choice. They didn't have to do it that way.
I think
It was okay.
theoretically,
Not a
I'm
big deal.
okay with
No,
that.
no.
I mean, I didn't see how they did
Yeah.
it, but I
I
would be
think-
totally okay with that.
I think for the story arc, it was fine. For
Yeah.
the character arc, it was fine. Again, they were already making Bilbo more active, and I
Right.
thought that was a fine place to do it.
Right.
I just really liked how the scene played in the book,
Right.
and I missed that.
Yeah.
But
Okay. I want to hear what you think.
especially since they had already cut Gandalf confusing them out of the animated version, so I
Right.
wanted to see.
I might have been okay with him choosing the adventure himself had it been based in that envying the hearts of dwarves that rose up the night before.
Yeah.
But it wasn't.
I
It
was-
rose up from Gandalf having this backstory about when you were a kid, you climbed trees.
Yeah.
cool, man.
Yeah.
No, exactly.
Okay,
Gandalf was like,
that's-
you used to not be like most hobbits. You used to be special.
Yeah.
What happened?
It used to be about the
And it's-
music.
Yes.
No, but
that's
no,
right.
but I'm saying
Well,
he
that's
used
right.
to, he
That's
used to be not a regular hobbit,
Yeah.
and the point is supposed to be even a regular person can be put in these circumstances and and find all this out about
Okay,
himself.
so what you're
But
saying.
he's not. He's
Yeah, okay.
already a special person.
got it. That's a good point.
So what you're saying is the book is Die Hard 1.
And the movie is Die Hard 4.
Yeah.
I do think it's weird that they made him more active, they made him make more decisions of his own, and yet he wasn't the one who coined out of the fireplace or out of the frying pan into the fire.
Right. Yeah. Well, here's an overarching thing that I thought was much better than I expected. Right. I thought, how much extra stuff are they going to weave in to this story, and is the actual story of the Hobbit going to be eclipsed by all of this other stuff? And the answer is no, it's not.
It wasn't eclipsed.
Not at all.
I did generally think when they got off from the book, I was enjoying it less than when they were on the book.
Yes, but the only thing I thought that really would have been better not just cut was the personal vendetta relationship with that head orc.
Yes.
I mean, the discussion with Galadriel was much better than I expected, and you can see that because of the connection.
Although that raised that was one of those scenes that like raises questions for me just in Middle Earth logic. Like, so wait, who's the most powerful here? Because here Galadriel's having secret mind conversations behind Saruman's back, and then like Gandalf seems surprised when Galadriel just disappears, and also, what does Celeborn think about Galadriel just sneaking off to hang out with Gandalf? Like, what's going on there?
They have a very trusting relationship. Celeborn doesn't even show.
But that was just one of those things where I'm like, Galadriel has powers that are unknown even to Saruman or something. Or granted, I'm not like the most well versed in all of Tolkien Wizard's powers, but I would have thought he would have some way to tell if they weren't paying attention. Yeah. And that whole scene, by the way, that just reminded me so much of like all those old sci-fi movies where Gandalf was like the one scientist who knows about the alien conspiracy, and they're all like the government officials who are like, nonsense, there's nothing going on here, you're imagining things.
Yes. Well, that is kind of a standard trope. I thought the riddle scene was pretty darn fantastic.
I loved the riddle scene.
That was the scene I was looking forward to.
I loved so much about it. I think Gollum.
Andy Serkis was great.
I think Gollum was even better than he was in Two Towers.
Yes.
I think he's the best thing about Two Towers.
Yes, absolutely.
I thought the way they got to the game of riddles worked really well.
Yeah.
Like that was one of the things I always had in the back of my mind, like, will people buy this in a movie where it's like, here's someone who can eat me, let's play riddles?
Yeah, that's right.
But the way they built up to it really worked.
Yeah.
That really worked. But that was one other area where maybe it wasn't Bilbo being more active, but it was Bilbo definitely being more decisive. Was the one thing is, I missed the that he accidentally answers time.
Oh yes. Okay, that was a very.
I was wondering how they were. Did that not play?
No,
because it didn't play in the radio version or the TV version.
Because
in the radio version,
that
was
the only flaw of the riddle scene.
Gollum says time's up, and Bill was like, time.
Yeah.
Like
because that's the one that even in the book works, because they say this is what he was thinking and this is what he said. In the radio version, it doesn't work because all they have him do is say time, and you unless you've read the book, you don't really get what's going on.
Yeah,
and
he needed to mutter.
In the animated version,
I need more time.
In the animated version, he goes, "Give me some time." And Gollum's like, "What?" He goes, "I said time." And Gollum's like, "Ah, you guessed the answer." He's like, "Oh yeah, that's what you need to." And it's like, no, Gollum wouldn't think that's what he's saying.
Yeah.
The pity taking Bilbo
was good.
I thought that was a beautiful scene.
Yeah,
that was where like he comes so close to just killing Gollum.
Yes.
And like just the look of loss on Gollum's face, where by this point he thinks Bilbo's escaped. He thinks he's lost the ring forever, and like you really buy
the pity
that Bilbo would pity Gollum. Let's talk about Radagast for a minute.
Okay.
I only saw the one Radagast scene, and I was like, what the hell is going on? And then I saw the spiders, and I'm like, okay, that's why it's relevant, but I still don't care.
Yes.
Well, okay, we have the inherent irony that Radagast is only offhandedly mentioned in The Hobbit. He's mentioned a lot more in the trilogy.
Right. Well, he has a cameo role.
Right. He actually shows up in the trilogy, and in the movies it's the other way around.
Right.
Well, in Lord of the Rings, they had actual content to create a trilogy. They didn't need to force it.
Well, and his I thought his character was unfortunate.
You know what his character reminded me of? The White Rabbit from Alice in Wonderland.
I was thinking of Merlin in the Disney.
I've also heard that comparison.
That,
but it's just like the, oh, I'm Nate.
Did you ever see
I don't know.
Did you ever see the Mystery Science Theater episode Jack Frost?
No.
It's this Russo-Finnish fairy tale. He seemed like a character who would have fit in to that.
Yeah.
Except for all the CGI animals that were
they actually made him look like a peyote brain, right? You know, he eats too many mushrooms. You know, like he's a
hippie.
A hippie, right? And that was unfortunate.
And
so that is another subplot could have been cut.
Well,
that was one of those moments where I'm like, oh, seriously? We got another thing going on here? Like, the backstory stuff was irritating. That was just flat out annoying.
Yeah.
I was less bothered by the stone giant scene than I expected it to be.
Me too.
Because everyone was, like, other people were saying, man, that stone giant scene just dragged on and on. And I guess I was just expecting it to be a lot longer than it was. And granted, compared to in the book, where their total screen time basically amounts to, by the way, there were giants too.
Yes.
To the point where most adaptations cut them out because I think the people doing the adaptation were like sort of skimmed over and was like, wait, was there something about giants?
No, that's too hard.
I must have been imagining that. There's no giants here.
Well, Peter Jackson does this because in
the wargs,
the warg riders that ambushed them on the way to Helm's Deep.
Right.
I went back to the book and I thought that's not in there. One sentence.
Mm-hmm.
They were ambushed by orcs on riding wargs.
If you're going to do the stone giants visually, of course they're going to be expanded into an action sequence.
They have to be. You can't do them in 30 seconds.
So I don't think the problem was that scene. I think the problem was just that by that point in the movie, there had been so many other expanded action scenes. Right. And I think individually on their own, there was nothing wrong. Nothing wronger. There was nothing more wrong with any one of them.
It wasn't the wrongest thing.
No, there was. I wouldn't say there was zero wrong with any one of them, but there was nothing
wrongnicity. It was not zero wrongnicity.
There was nothing more wrong with any one of them.
The wrong to existent ratio was no higher.
Yeah.
There was nothing more wrong with any one of them than there was wrong with the action sequences in the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Right.
And with any one of them, it's just that there were so many of them. And yes, there were changes. Yes, there were additions. Nothing worse than Aragorn outnumbering 5 ring wraiths at Weathertop. Nothing worse than Legolas skateboarding at Helm's Deep.
Yes.
Nothing.
But that was brief.
Nothing halfway as bad as Faramir.
Yes.
Okay,
that's right.
So there are problems with this movie. I think in 11 years, the fans will forget as many of the problems with this movie as they have forgotten with the trilogy.
Oh, I think in 11 years, people will forget this movie exists. See, it's like
No, because it'll be.
Well, maybe people only watch the first hour of it.
In 11 years, they'll finally release the director's.
My point is merely
of the whole
things like Faramir. Yeah, that sucked, but at the same time, that's one character in an ensemble in an epic storyline. My problem with The Hobbit,
but it's the whole sidetrack where he takes them to Gondor.
Okay, sure. Again, it's a sidetrack. That's like saying the one Radagast subplot was stupid, compared to the whole tone of the film was just awkward and off.
Yeah, and I actually don't think it was.
I don't think it was. To make it so much like Lord of the Rings was a mistake. Weaving it in with the other movies is fine, and I'm glad it feels like the same Middle Earth.
Yes,
as the other
very
movies.
important. Very important.
But it doesn't to me.
Well,
that's my big problem.
Yeah, you're insane. So.
Yeah. But that's my big problem with the movies. It doesn't feel like the same Middle Earth. Hobbiton feels small. In Fellowship of the Ring, Hobbiton feels big.
Well,
Hobbiton
there was a lot more screen time for Hobbiton.
You see more of Hobbit. Yeah. You see more of Hobbit in Lord of the Rings than you do.
You see more of it, and it's not just like, oh, they had more time to show more of it. It's like the shots of Hobbiton were wider, were bigger, were much more let's show.
I don't think there was,
Hobbiton.
I don't think there was
agree.
any shot in Fellowship that was wider than those overhead shots of Bilbo running to catch up with the dwarves.
The overhead shots
The overhead
and-
shots
and-
showed the side of a hill.
And
the
wait a minute, out the front door, across the hill. There were a
They
couple of
showed
those.
the hill.
Yeah.
They showed,
Yeah, okay, they
but
showed this-
that just because that's the only part of Hobbit they're showing doesn't.
And then like when
make
he's
it-
running and they've got like the two hills to block out the rest of Hobbiton, like it
Yeah, I didn't
felt
get that at all.
it felt very much like a tiny corner of Hobbit. It did not feel like
No, I
Hobbiton
felt-
was big.
I
I actually
get
felt
that.
like,
Of course, we
Yes.
were also awake when we watched
yeah,
the movie.
that's
so.
the
There is
place.
that.
You're right. I felt like, yes, that's the place. And then Rivendell, expansive scene.
Yeah.
Did not get there.
I actually liked the Rivendell scenes better in The Hobbit than in Lord of the Rings because
In
Elrond was more
Fellowship?
hospitable.
Yeah.
He was kind of a bitsy
I remember.
thing.
In
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings.
I remember the first time I saw Fellowship in theaters being underwhelmed by Rivendell and by Lothlorien.
Lothlorien was weird. the
Yeah,
first time.
Lothlorien was
That
and
was
nothing-
weird. Counterintuitive.
By the time I got to the end of the first movie, The Hobbit, like despite all its flaws, the Lord of the Rings trilogy also had
flaws.
similar
Yeah.
flaws. And by the time I got to the end of the Fellowship, or by the time I got to the end of watching The Hobbit tonight, I thought, like, I felt the same way I felt when I saw Fellowship in theaters. You know, I felt that again, with a few minor differences. There wasn't the same anticipation because this wasn't the first time seeing a big Tolkien movie.
Right, exactly.
But there also, I didn't have the same. I didn't have issues with it as big.
yes.
Like, the issues I had with this movie were spread out further between than the issues I had the first time I saw Fellowship.
Yeah.
Um,
Although Fellowship also stuck closer than it was. The Two Towers was the one with the
Two
most.
Towers was the one that really
Fellowship,
had.
Fellowship did stick closer, but I still had, like, by the end of Fellowship, I was like, oh, that was a great film-going experience. But even throughout it, I was like, Lothlorien's weird.
Yes,
You know,
See,
Rivendell's weird. Aragorn is fighting off 5 ring wraiths. I guess Peter Jackson has pacing issues because it's not even that he drags things out. He drags some things out and compresses other
And
things.
compresses other.
Like we talk about how in Fellowship, between a shortcut to mushrooms and the
Prancing
The
Pony.
Prancing
there are 3.5
Pony.
chapters.
yeah, 3.5 chapters just get trimmed, including half of shortcut to
Yeah.
mushrooms.
And then you take one sentence and turn it into 20 minutes.
Yeah, it's Peter Jackson has a very interesting ADD when he's going
Yes,
through these.
yes. And some of it has to come down to putting text into film. You've got to make these kinds of choices. You don't have to make all the choices he
Well,
makes.
you don't have to make these. You have to make choices.
See,
You don't
here's
have
the
to
thing.
Yeah.
arrive at the decisions he arrived
That's
at.
exactly right.
But you have to make changes when adapting to a cinematic medium.
But it's
Yeah.
part of the problem with Peter Jackson's pacing is his understanding of character arcs is very different from Tolkien's, in my opinion.
Okay, how so?
Well, okay, for example, he only seems to ever portray character arcs that involve either an element of overcoming self-doubt or
Yes.
overcoming overt oppression. There is
Yes, yes.
like there is no minor arc. There is no. It all has to be overdone and
Yes,
melodramatic.
yes.
So with Aragorn, he
Well,
had
Aragorn,
to,
that's the big disaster we've talked about for years,
for
right?
Faramir.
Yes.
Again,
Same thing.
Same thing.
Yes.
On
With
the
the,
other
whole
hand,
Thorin
I
thing.
actually think the Aragorn one is a worse crime against humanity
Then
than the
Faramir. Because Faramir's one movie.
Yeah.
Aragorn's the
On
whole
the-
trilogy.
on the other
Faramir,
hand-
it didn't matter.
On the other hand,
Yeah.
I'm not defending necessarily the results of Peter Jackson making changes to character arcs. I'm not necessarily defending the choices he made, but let's face it, Tolkien only really cared about characters insofar as they allowed languages to be spoken.
Yes, well, there is that.
Well,
There is that. Tolkien had this medieval Christian vision of virtue that can actually play an active role in a person's life that Jackson loses.
and so-
There's a
Now
very
let's look at
romantic
The Hobbit.
in Tolkien's characters. There's a very romantic notion of the good parts of like Arthurian legend of
Right.
like days of chivalry,
Steadfastness.
the romantic notion. We now live in an age where those notions have been deconstructed so much, where people are like,
or
well,
psychologized.
Or
Right.
psychology.
Yeah.
Or no, but I'm saying we're like people look at Arthurian legend and they're like, well, it's not all noble. It's also
really about oppressing others.
There's misogyny. There's blah blah blah. There's and
no, that's exactly right.
And
this is your point that you were raising too about self-doubt. Anyway, go on.
And for better or worse, Tolkien was. I think in a lot of ways, Tolkien was trying to create a world that was all the good parts.
Yes.
Of those things. And modern audiences have been have become so aware of the bad parts of those things that they're very distrusting of the good parts.
But Tolkien's idea, I think, is to say, let's hold forth a compelling story where character plays this role.
Yeah.
Not just characters, but
character. Virtue and steadfastness and loyalty and all of these Arthurian virtues you're talking about, so that people can see them embodied in such a way that they think, oh, maybe they're not so bad after all. And because, as Tolkien said in some of the interviews, when people accused him of it being escapist, he said, well, of all people who are most concerned with people escaping, and that's wardens in a jail, they're the ones who are worried about people escaping.
I would be curious if, again, people would have had more issues with Fellowship had it not been the first big Tolkien movie. Like, I think because we already have a Lord of the Rings trilogy, there wasn't, like, on a subconscious level, we don't need The Hobbit to be as good as we needed Lord of the, like, as we don't need to like it as much as
when Ralph Bakshi came out, it was well revered.
Exactly. People liked.
That is a good point.
People liked the animated Lord of the Rings
just because it was
because of what they had.
Yes, that's right.
There are two categories I feel you have to look at these at. One is as an adaptation, and one is as a film.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
And the biggest reason that I had issues with this that I didn't have with Fellowship is Fellowship holds up as a film.
Yes.
Regardless of what you say is an adaptation, it is a damn good film.
Yeah.
It holds up. The characters are compelling. The plot sucks you in.
Right.
It's all the information is revealed in interesting ways that keep you going, even though it's a 3-hour movie.
Right.
So, regardless of its problems as an adaptation, as a film, the Lord of the Rings trilogy holds up.
Right.
My problems with The Hobbit were both as an adaptation and as a film.
Right.
As a film, it did not interest me at all. As an adaptation, I took issue with it.
Yeah.
So
very important distinction. I thought as an adaptation, not bad. I mean, not perfect. Some flaws.
Not the worst version of The Hobbit.
No,
because the worst version of The Hobbit is probably that animated short where Gandalf, Thorin Oakenshield, and a princess show up at Bilbo's door.
I have not seen that one.
Yes. Well,
I'm surprised I have not seen that one. You've been holding out on me.
I'm not sure I'm in a position to watch this as a movie. I watch it as a film. I watch it as an adaptation.
I don't think
I love the book so much.
That's true. I don't think it's possible for me to watch this as a standalone. Like, even less than it was possible for me to watch Lord of the Rings as a standalone. Let's put this in perspective. The Hobbit, when I was a kid, The Hobbit was the first movie I ever really wanted to make myself. It might have been, I mean, when I was even younger, I think I had a vague notion that I wanted to make Narnia movies. But
we also had already watched Narnia movies at that point.
Yeah, and The Hobbit was the first thing that I ever really had plans in my... Like, I planned out scenes in my head. Like, when I grow up and make the Hobbit movie, the plans I had sucked because I was a kid and I didn't know any better. But to the point where, like, I wanted to make The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, to the point where when I first heard that some Peter Jackson guy was going to make Lord of the Rings, I was mad that it wasn't that. Like, I was mad that somebody else was beating me to it. But then I grew up and gained perspective. I'll always be comparing this movie to the book and to other adaptations and to ways to make this movie, to ways to make this book into a movie.
Right.
And like ranking this against other adaptations, I still think the BBC radio version is my favorite adaptation of The Hobbit.
It's epic.
It's amazing. It's, even though, again, because of the medium, it has some silly things like where everybody's narrating everything as they're doing it because it's radio.
Yes.
which only is really an issue where Bilbo's like, yes, well, at least I can sneak around. You know, hobbits are very sneaky and silent. Yes, we're very sneaky.
They needed a narrator for that.
They had a narrator. They just
didn't use the narrator.
But, you know, it's radio.
Yeah.
But this was, again, everything where they actually stuck to the book here, where they were actually following the story of the book, I think they did everything from there better in this one than they did in the animated one, certainly. Almost everything that bothered me will be very easy to skip on DVD.
Yeah.
I can just hit the next button and just skip those chapters and
Although
get
you shouldn't have
to the next.
So how many stars will you give it?
I don't know. It's very hard for me to give star ratings these days.
I'd go 3.5. I said 4 earlier. I might go 3.5.
And
because I just remembered the Radagast scenes. I thought, well,
I give it 3/4 out of 2 stars because I only saw an hour of the film and cannot give it a full 5 stars.
Bilbo Baggins,